Marsland and Prince's 2012 piece is an introduction to several articles in Medical Anthropology Quarterly. It's entitled, "What is Life Worth? Exploring Biomedical Interventions, Survival, and the Politics of Life." Indeed, it helps to introduce Chris Davis's work that we had just discussed earlier in the first recording. So what Marsland and Prince are attempting to do here is to examine the edges of biopolitics and where exactly those lie. And they situate biopolitics and biopower from Foucault's 1979 work. Foucault noted that in modern societies, power is situated and exercised at the level of life itself. It is also now, of course, seen at the level of molecules. As biopolitics is rooted in an individual ethos of care, there are a number of things that biopolitics would potentially exclude, as pointed out by anthropologists over time. Some of the matters not considered by biopolitics as a whole would be inequality in particular. They are also interested in unpacking the ideas about what value actually means, particularly extraction and commodification of bodily processes and substances. And they also make statements towards the end of life as being more than biology, considering vitality. So I'm going to go through each one of these 3 points in turn. First, the things that biopolitics leaves out, namely, and most predominantly in the estimation of Marsland and Prince, is inequality. There are enormous power in the context of biomedical interventions in terms of enhancement of human capabilities. But the question that they ask, as critical medical anthropologists would, whose capacities can be transformed? They also know that the promises of biotechnology are always as out of reach. They're never quite attainable. And so they highlight what is actually possible from a technological side, but they note the economics behind this sometimes does not lead to the full attainment of even access to pharmaceuticals, which is only a small piece in dealing with HIV, for example. And so in their discussion on ART, or antiretroviral therapy, HIV, and intellectual property rights, they note how some countries were able to petition, and also through non-government organizations, for Doctors Without Borders in particular in South Africa, and later Brazil. This activism makes a difference ultimately, and the companies decide to, quote unquote, make an exception and allow for the production of generics. And again, to consider the complete burden of disease here. So this is one example of inequality that is highlighted by Marsland and Prince. They also draw from Rose's work in 2007, noting, and Rose notes that basic human needs are being met through clean water, sanitation, food security. This is seen as a greater importance in maintaining overall health of individuals than highly medicalized medical interventions. Nevertheless, these are the former given short shrift in relation to the latter. There's still the focus or emphasis on technological solutions such as pharmaceuticals versus prevention and clinical care overall. And what they ultimately are working towards here, and what ties into their next discussion on value, is the overall logic of choice, that patients are viewed as consumers, customers with health products, and these are decisions that they make at the individual level. And this idea of choice, this idea of health being delivered as choice, is what is actually producing inequalities overall, because this becomes seen as the idea that people don't necessarily want to be healthy because they're not making those decisions. And this goes in the discussion of value. You can see down here, market ideologies, the fourth point down, health, the good or bad, is seen as a matter of choice. So what they do in the discussion on value is they talk about two types of value. They talk about economic value, which would include things like what would be an individual's willingness to pay for a certain product in the market, as well as morality and ethics in terms of attaining the good life. What does that look like, or well-being, and those that are deserving of the good life. Vital value examines the convergence of the two, both economic value as well as morality and ethics. Disease and diagnosis, in some instances, such as Petriana's work on Chernobyl, are sometimes seen as the only opportunity that individuals have to make any claim on the state and advance their lives ever so incrementally. And so having a particular status in post-Soviet Ukraine allows individuals to have some economic security where they wouldn't otherwise have it. Marsland and Prince continue on and discuss vitality. And they note that seeing life reflects political philosophy. The idea of life itself is a product of biology as a scientific and hence cultural enterprise. They note that biology is not neutral. Illness may be viewed as a deviation from a healthy norm, but illness or disease, following Singer and Baer, produces fixed forms, in other words, blood sugar. And so illness creates, or disease creates, its own normative structure. Normal is discussed as a value judgment, and of course this is, I think we can see this in the context pervading much of work in anthropology as a whole and looking at cultural relativism. And you have to consider the collectives in which life takes place. Hence, it is never simply life itself for Marsland and Prince. They consider the politics of life within the complexities of lived lives as their goal and as a stated goal of anthropology as a whole. Moving on, Moniruzzaman in 2012 wrote Living Cadavers in Bangladesh, Bioviolence in the Human Organ Bazaar. It adopts a critical medical anthropology perspective drawing from the work of Nancy Shepard Hughes. Following Marcus, the suggestion is Moniruzzaman adopts this and follows the bones in order to examine the long-term ramifications of organ donation. The theoretical frame is the idea of bioviolence, which is developed over the course of the text. Bioviolence is defined as an instrument to transform human bodies, either living or dead, either whole or in parts, as sites of diverse exploitations viable through new medical technologies. It is the byproduct of technological experimentation and a vehicle for structural exploitation to fulfill the medical need and desire of the affluent few, but at the cost of bodily harm to the deprived majority. Often presented in narratives of selflessness, heroism, and morality, kidney donation is presented to potential donors as a win-win situation. It is seen as a gift of life with some compensation, and Moniruzzaman notes here this is a type of symbolic violence drawing from Bourdieu's work in 1990. And the example that's illustrated here is the money promised to them, the donors, seems like a lot given their situation, and the downplaying of the importance of the sleeping kidney. That is, it's not that important overall to health. The Organ Bazaar is part of a larger discussion that Moniruzzaman goes into on medical tourism. Bangladeshis have their passports taken from them as they enter into India. The sellers essentially are forced to live in poor and cramped conditions, often up to 10 individuals that are going through the surgery, going through the removal of their kidneys at the same time. Medical tests need to be redone in India because the Bangladeshi results are not accepted. Buyers increasingly establish their authority while sellers become their passive agents. Again, I mean, having your passport taken as soon as you enter into a country, then you're not able or free to leave. There's also the idea of informed consent here, and how possible is this given the misinformation that's shared with the donors, including the long-term ramifications, and even in a lot of instances, how much they're actually going to be compensated. The scar resulting that you can see examples of here in this picture of three Pakistani individuals could have been avoided by paying for the additional $200 for the laparoscopic surgery, but again, that's not provided as an option to these individuals. They are stigmatized on their return. They're referred to as kidney man or kidney men. Their ability to work often deteriorates with a deterioration in health. They typically experience issues such as tiredness, dizziness, shortness of breath, as well as other health issues, some much more serious. Most informants were in worse economic conditions than they were prior to undergoing, to essentially becoming living cadavers, quote unquote. 27 of the 33 interviewed did not receive the full payment they were promised. Only 2 benefited economically in the long run. They realized that they were all running after an illusion they call sonar horin, or golden deer, and they considered themselves subhuman along lines of morality overall. The conclusion of the article challenges bioethicists who call for a legalization of the organ trade as itself a form of symbolic violence, albeit not a deliberate one. Svendsen's 2015 piece, Selective Reproduction, Social and Temporal Imaginaries, and Negotiating the Value of Life in Human and Animal Neonates, draws from Engelbin's 1998 contrast between zo, which refers to bare life, common to all living beings, and bios, to qualify life that is protected by law, living. The difference between the two is fundamental to the question, what is a life worth living? Svendsen and Walby note that biological lives are embryos to be transformed into stem cells, whereas biographical lives are embryos designed to become full-fledged individuals. They also adopt, following Donna Haraway, a multi-species approach in the social sciences, which considers fundamental relationships between humans and non-humans. The boundaries between species are continually challenged in various sciences, including biological anthropology. Goes into a discussion of what life is worth living, examining parallels across decision-making processes for fragile infants and animals bred to enhance their medical support. Borrows from science and technology studies in terms of configurations of beings and surrounding practices which are at the same time social, moral, and material. The cultural production of viability, hence the worth of the being overall. And this becomes really important in the context of the NICU, where you have maybe lives that are in Denmark can become fully fledged contributing members of society with future contributions to a welfare society rooted in reciprocal relations. The infant in the NICU is heavily reliant on technology, becomes a sort of cyborg, if you will, as we'll be discussing further in the class, which becomes domesticated through decorations of family members and hence situates the infants in webs of kinship and investment or biographical life. And this by no means not only happens in Denmark, but also in the United States, such as Christmas displays that you could see in NICUs, family ornamentation, pictures, these sorts of things. There was discussion about the ability to parent guidelines, the unfit mother with drug and alcohol addiction in the context of the NICU, which leads to a lower potential for the child. And there's a discussion amongst the residents that Svendsen is privy to, and they essentially work through which course of action should be taken. They decide that they're going to provide active treatment, doing what is necessary to give the infant the greatest chance, because this is viewed as Denmark's responsibility to care for the child, because they failed to provide the woman with an abortion in a prompt manner. This is a really interesting discussion about the ability of parents and life likelihoods for their individuals. I do recommend you look at it a little bit more thoroughly. The absence of future life, on the other hand, a painful operation that might prolong the life of an infant to 5 months. And this is where Svendsen maintains there's a slippage of biographical life into biological life. There are concerns overall with viability as well as temporal trajectories. What is going to happen? How is this individual going to be a viable member of society? In the context of the animal laboratory, you have the delivery of piglets to match the physiology of premature infant born in week 27. Piglets are viewed as having a relationship only with other laboratory components. They, in essence, become part of the laboratory instrumentation. They are standardized, they're fed the same, infected and killed on day 5. Again, they are standardized and immediately separated from the mother who never sees them. Where standardization breaks down with excessive suffering, longer lifespan, and/or a failure to infect them, then there is more in play than the societal collectivity. In Denmark, the predictive temporalities parallels the issue with the NICU infants, the predictability of the disease course, and death in 5 days. So these 5 articles taken together should have provided you with much fodder to consider what anthropology can contribute to discussions of bioethics. What does it mean to consider the value of life? How life is understood? Who can assign a value to life? How is that contested? Also, the slippage between life and between biographical lives and biological lives, and how has this challenged anthropology as a whole?